should be live. Yep, welcome guys to Season 2, Part 1 of What If Earth Was in Star Wars. Unlike last time where I haven't seen this one yet, so I don't know what's gonna happen. This one's seems short. The rest aren't, so without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, we are announcing a brand new giveaway for 75,000 subscribers. All you have to do is obviously follow me. We are giving away one lightsaber from Art Sabers. They are sponsoring this giveaway, so what you have to do is go to the pinned comment down below, follow Art Sabers on Instagram, like their image, and tag 2 of your friends, and you will be entered into our giveaway. We will be doing this giveaway until we hit 75,000 subscribers here on PPSW. Thank you again for your continuous support. Our season begins inside the Messina system, a system that had yet been discovered. Planet Earth was located just off of the Rima trade route, which went all the way from the deep core to the outer rim. Earth itself was at the very end of the Rima trade route, near Dagobah and Utapau. Though Earth was just off of it, and it had been undiscovered, that is until this year, 42 BBY. Currently, there was a band of Jedi going out to numerous planets in the Outer Rim. This was an annual trip in which the Jedi brought back Force-sensitive children to the Jedi Temple. Of course, for the most part, the Outer Rim had been mapped out, but not the entire galaxy. It was just too large. The Jedi had finished their routes, but they ended up jumping out of hyperspace to an odd location. They had never been here before. They were on the Hydian Way, bouncing around near Mustafar and planets like Atravis and Ratan, but they weren't near there. They were closer to Utapau, but they also weren't at the planet of Askaj. While the Jedi were entering a new solar system, there were people on the third planet from the Sun. Down on the planet of Earth, near the Italian peninsula and within the Mediterranean Sea, was a small island. Inside the port city Messina and under the shadow of Mount Etna, Janice Palumbo walked the streets of the ancient city. The year was 217 BC, and it was a modern beauty of the Mediterranean. Messina was located at the edge of the island of Sicily and nearly connected to the tip of the Italian boot. Janice Palumbo was born into partisan class of the Roman Empire. He was an upper-class man who frequented this beautiful city. Word had just come back from the troops of the Second Punic War. Reports were trickling in about the Battle of Lake Trasimene, which was an absolute disaster for the Roman forces. Nearly 15,000 men had been killed. It was a tragic loss to the Romans. They were genuinely worried about the possibility of losing the Second Punic War. Janus was very disappointed. The legion from Sicily was 400 strong, and he sent them off to join up with the rest of the Roman army. He believed that they would have survived or even just come back victorious, but this Hannibal individual had been victorious before, and he seemed to be winning more and more battles. Janus walked down to the barracks in Messina to see the troops training. He crossed his arms and thought about what would become of these men when they were ready to join the war effort. Sicily at this point was sending away nearly 1,200 troops to the bulk of the Roman army. Of course, not all their troops were sent to the Roman army. Being that Sicily sat on the Mediterranean all alone, it needed to have active troops in case of an invasion. After inspecting the troops, Janus continued walking throughout the city streets. He was a consul in the city, and was also a representative who would be sent to the Republic of Rome from time to time. Nothing too large, but simply to inform the Republic of what Messina needed in terms of supplies, and also to know what Messina would send to Rome and the rest of the Roman Empire. It was a functional system, and Janus was proud to be a part of it. The Palumbos of Messina were one of the very many long-standing upper-class houses on the port city and on the island itself. Janus's father was one of the few individuals still alive from when the Romans took over Sicily. Their family garnered great wealth and power, but because of Janus's father, they were able to keep some of their wealth as well as some of their power. Inside of Janus's home, there was his family. As per traditional for partisans, the entire family lived with him. Though the family wasn't exactly large, there was his wife Aurelia and their son Titus. On the other hand, both of Janus's parents were alive, and exclusively Aurelia's mother too. They did have a dog, but it was just like any of the other dogs in the neighborhood. It mostly stayed outside of the residence, but from time to time it would wander around getting food from other people and so forth. When Janus returned home, he picked up his son and held him on his shoulder, walking out to the top balcony of his home. The home had a great view, depicting just enough of the sea and just enough of Mount Etna. It was absolutely beautiful. It was a good life. Janus started talking to his son as the day slowly turned to night in the dim twilight. Janus lit a torch on the balcony and began talking. Janus told Titus that the world was his, as he lifted his finger and pointed towards the night sky. Without light pollution, the entire galaxy could be seen from the small balcony in Messina. Janus told his son that the gods and the stars would always be with him. Jupiter would always look down on him with favorability, and he would guide Titus to finding all the successes in his life. There was so much that Titus had in front of him, that as long as he trusted the gods and the path they laid before him, He could become a true leader if he wanted so. If he chased the way of the warrior, then Minerva would guide him. If he wished to travel the vast seas of the globe, then Neptune would be with him. Titus looked at his father, and then the torch blew out. Janus looked over at the extinguished torch and wondered how that could be possible. There wasn't even a gust of wind, let alone a little breeze. It was silent. Janus told Titus that the day where the world would be his would come, but for tonight, it was time for rest. Janus wouldn't say a word about the thing that just happened, and shrugged it off. It would be superstitious to believe that it was something else or anything else, even though his 2-year-old son had been a bit out there, to say the least, since birth. Janus and Aurelia hadn't said a word about it because they believed that it wasn't really a good idea. There was no saying that the Romans would treat him like an outcast, but they didn't want to test that theory. Outside of Earth, a Jedi shuttle continued flying towards the sun of the solar system. They were using their scanners to search across the entire system and see if there were any populated planets. They weren't concerned about planets with living conditions because there are plenty of those planets in the galaxy that weren't exactly livable, but people could live on them. However, they were just scanning for life forms on these planets. There was one planet in the system where they could see a population, though there was one issue. The population wasn't exactly civilized. The few Jedi Masters inside the shuttle discussed it with each other, if it would be worthwhile to land on the planet or not. The Jedi were under directive to not engage with planets with populations that hadn't yet been exposed to the galaxy or the technology of the galaxy. There was a genuine sound reason for doing so, which was they could severely freak out the population and become revered as gods. The Jedi weren't gods, and they didn't want to become revered as such. It was an initiative started during the era of the High Republic, of which the Jedi in the Outer Rim saved the planet from a group of pirates, and the population, which hadn't been assimilated to the galaxy, revered the Jedi as gods. In that particular circumstance, it made sense, because the Jedi saved them, but they couldn't just be held up as gods. So the Republic came in and helped assimilate the planet so that they could see the Jedi as protectors and knights rather than gods. The Jedi began piloting down towards the planet and arrived over the Atlantic Ocean. They picked up a large population towards the east, and so they began flying east. There was no visible land for a good while until they saw two separated pieces of continents, one to the north and another to the south. The population density was rather small, so they continued into what seemed to be a sea surrounded by two large continents. They continued down and saw an island, nearly connected by a large piece of the continent. There was a large mountain nearby, and so the Jedi flew down into the middle of the night and landed their vessel on the mountain, hidden within the trees. Jedi Master Jera Kron told the other Jedi that she would go out into the night and return within one planetary cycle. She could feel that there was someone here on the planet, someone tightly connected to the Force. She also brought with her a pocket translator. Typically, protocol droids would be used to do this for people, but for the Jedi, they carried pocket translators so that they could pick up on native dialect and figure out how to speak Galactic Common through such dialect. It would take a while for the translator to piece everything together, but if Master Kron walked through a crowded city long enough with the translator on, then it would likely be able to put pieces of the sentences together and word structures and so forth. Of course, the dialect for her, after translated, would be a little rough around the edges, and it would come off like a 5-year-old talking to an adult, but it would be better than just trying to simply tell them that she was from another planet in a large, large galaxy. Master Kron walked down from Mount Etna as she felt the Force within the planet. There was a strong sense of the Force here, but it was because the Force was uninfluenced by the galaxy around it. This happened a lot on planets where the galaxy wasn't actively present. For a Jedi, especially to be on a planet like Earth, without the radical influence of the galaxy, it was nearly intoxicating. As Kron got down from the mountain, she stopped and got to her knees. The trees that covered the mountain shielded her from a late-night sprinkle. She put her hand down in the mud and felt through the living Force on the planet. There was a child here, a child of the Force. Master Kron couldn't figure out the exact age of the child, but she did know that the child had a powerful enough aura in the Force, which for the Jedi would likely be enough for that child to be welcomed into the Jedi Order. The Jedi were strict on their selection process, so Master Kron had to be hopeful that this child was below the age of 3. If the child was any older, then it could cause some issues for...
With got to be metallics, I don't just stand out, I shine.
I don't do free sponsors. One moment.
was below the age of 3. If the child was any older, then it could cause some issues for acceptance within the Jedi Order. Jera got up and walked down towards a nearby city that sat under Mount Etna. She raised her robes over her head as the dawn began to glimmer above the edge of the earth. The early risers and the lower class workers were already out. The few farmers that had farms that led to Messina were in front of her as she walked down a dirt road. The working class was already on the move. She got a couple of weird looks because someone typically of her stature wouldn't be out during this time of day, but no one really cared. Kron's translator turned on and she was picking up on the dialect of the working class. She carried forward towards the city itself. It was a beautiful city. When the sun crept up into the sky, more individuals dressed like her left their abodes, though some of the individuals were wearing longer outfits. Most of them preferred tunics considering they were much more practical and much more comfortable under the Mediterranean sun. Kron got to the edge of the town and looked out at the beautiful cove where the docks were filled with sailors. Some of the sailors were on their boats preparing to leave, and others were just getting out into the harbor. Jara was thoroughly impressed. She'd seen many planets with populations without technology, but this one was by far the most impressive. Though the other planets she saw, she never walked amongst its people. Near the topmost part of the city, Janus gave his love to his wife and his son before he walked out of his home. The city streets were bustling, and the smell of red iron smoke in the sea filled his nose. Nothing was more perfect. Typically, the baker didn't sell edged pieces of loaves of bread and ended up giving them to dogs that frequented the neighborhood. And so if a partisan wished to have a piece, he wasn't required to, but he wanted to. The baker and Janus were friendly with each other, but truthfully nothing was better than a little focaccia in the morning. It was a great piece of bread to start the day with. Not too filling, not too light, just perfect. If Janus was lucky, he'd be able to snag a piece of prosciutto to go along with his bread. Life was great as a partisan, as Janus moved to the beautiful edge of the topmost part of the city. He looked down and smiled. Sure, the losses of yesterday meant he would have to prepare the loved ones who lost their fathers, sons, and brothers in combat. Janus looked out at the port and kept an eye out for any Roman vessels, just to be sure he wasn't expecting any noblemen or fellow partisans from across the small strait to visit him. When Janus finished his focaccia, he made his way down into the governmental building in the city. As an upper-class individual, he had plenty of luxuries, but he also had to carry his own weight. During the day, his home would be approached by a young woman. When the door was answered, it was Aurelia. She saw a young woman and was very confused, but with the help of the translator, Jedi Master Kron told the woman that she would like a moment to speak with her. Aurelia told Kron that she didn't permit lower-class individuals into her home. There would be no speaking to her. Master Kron pleaded with Aurelia, but the woman seemed adamant that there was no place for Kron here. Between the hood and the rough dialect and the fact that Aurelia was alone, there was nothing in the world that would separate her from Titus. To her, it was just a precautionary thing. Master Kron could feel the force from inside the house, but she couldn't just break in and enter. She would wait, learn more of the dialect, and prepare herself for another conversation. So since she was waiting, she needed to find another outfit, one that would allow her to fit more in with the times and the customs, especially with the customs of those associated with the partisans. The day moved by slowly, as the sun moved up above the sky. It got much hotter. Jara was thrown off a bit by the heat, and her choice in wear was a lovely gown. She felt regret, because it was really hot. A tunic would have been much better of a look for her, but she couldn't hide her Jedi robes under the tunic. She could hide the robes under a gown though. Though even Jara had to admit, the gown was luscious. It was very fitting and it made her look elegant as ever, almost making her wish the Jedi still donned the robes of the High Republic, because they had a much more beautiful, elegant look to them. Jara sprung through the street like a spring flower. And while sure it wasn't part of the mission, she might as well wait until that particular house had someone else in it so she could try and procure the child. Though, with a stomach rumbling, she had to try some delicacy, which she found to be abundant. Nothing better than eating on the Mediterranean. Between the vegetables of the fields and the meats of the sea, she had herself a luxurious meal. She had much more of a day to wait, so she stayed around the same area to keep an eye on the house, but no one went in. When the day eventually got later, she saw the woman from earlier walk out of the house, and in her arms, slung over her shoulder, was a child. Jara immediately knew who this child was. It was the child connected to the Force, so she followed. The child had a little animal in his hands. It was made of clay, and inside of it was something sweet. It was a pacifier of sorts, and it was common for this era. Was it medically cleared? Not really by Galactic Republic standards, but if it worked for these people, then it worked. Jara kept her distance, following behind the child and his mother, though she distracted the child. Titus could feel the connection to the Force, and he ended up dropping his pacifier. Jara almost panicked, because she couldn't use the Force in front of the people around her, but before the pacifier smashed to the ground, it stopped, and slowly dragged up the mother's back. The child was using the Force himself to make sure he didn't lose his pacifier. Both Janus and Aurelia noticed this other times throughout their time with Titus, but neither one of them ever said a thing about it. They didn't tell Titus to stop doing it, but they also didn't acknowledge it publicly. Janice and Aurelia kept it private because they believed that their child was a child of a god, and they believed that once their child was old enough, he would sow greatness into the Roman Empire. It's why Janice told his son every night that the world was his. Because he was under the assumption that his son was truly a god, then the world did actually belong to him, though that wasn't really quite the case for the situation. Jara followed the mother and the son into a large circular area that sat overlooking the large sea. There were beautiful pillars outside, and there was a man standing checking attendance. Aurelia and Janice met up, as he took his son and plopped him onto his own shoulder before putting his hand around his wife's hip and walking her into the amphitheater. It was the end of the work week, and what better to do as a partisan than to get some quality entertainment, the best on the side of the Messina Strait. There was a queue next to the entrance that, according to the translator, was for lower class individuals, or partisans that didn't have tickets to the event. If not everybody who had a ticket showed up, then those who were there in the line first could choose what was left out of the crowd. Of course, they would have to wait until a given time of day for that to happen, which, the way the Sicilians marked it down, was when the sun touched the tip of Mount Etna. When that happened, a limited number of individuals were let into the amphitheater. Jara was lucky enough to get in. She sat down by herself and watched over, looking into the crowd and finding the child. Jara watched the family of three, and then the event transpired. It was certainly a much different society. In the Republic, it was common to see this type of behavior in the underground, but even in the civilized galaxy, it was robots and droids fighting with each other rather than people. For a Jedi, it was hard not to act. But she was there as a visitor, not a guardian. The strongest of the gladiators had to be the ones to settle this and survive. It was a gruesome event, and honestly, it was kind of ironic. The elegance of the crowd, they all were dressed up beautifully. In their arms were their sons and their daughters, and next to them were their small children. They all cheered it on, encouraging their favorite warrior to win the match. The arena inside of the theater itself was lit by the sunset, and next to the gladiators were dozens of torches, adding a fiery illumination to the fight. After the first one was slain, there was another group of fighters that came up. After them, there was a match between duos. It was a terrific way to end the week, and with the gladiatorial battles over, all the people would get up and begin to walk out. On the outside of the amphitheater, there were a couple of Roman legionaries. The only reason is that sometimes gladiators got a little feisty with the nobles who cheered against them, and in some circumstances, they did take it personally. If they took it personally, they, at the risk of everything, tried to kill the partisan, and it usually resulted in their own death. As the theater cleared out, Jara located the child and followed the family. It was entirely dark outside at this point, aside from the numerous torches that lined the streets of Messina. Jara, at this point, had figured out how to get into communication with the upper-class family, and when she spotted them, she caught up to them, addressing herself as partisan Jara Kron. She was a representative from Rome, and she wished to speak with the two of them regarding their noble child. This for a short moment terrified the parents. They were afraid that Titus was going to be executed for what they believed was a power of the gods. Though Jara simply told the parents that she had no reason to discuss what she wanted to talk about in public, and wished to talk about it with them within the quiet of their own home. Janice and Aurelia agreed to this, though they warned Jara that there were relatives within the home that would likely be awake, considering most of the Palumbos were late-nighters anyways. When they arrived inside the home, they sat the child down. Jara told Janice and Aurelia that she was truly sorry for lying to them. Janice grabbed a family heirloom off the wall and held a sword out in front of him, demanding to know what she meant. Was it an overreaction? No. Typically, people didn't just come into your home based off a lie. Jara shedded her gown and told Aurelia that she may have it if she like. She then told the two of them that she was a Jedi. They were from a planet far from here, but currently the Jedi were on Coruscant. As she said that she used the Force and laid out a small holocron on the floor. Both parents immediately thought she was a god as well. As Janice dropped the sword, the holocron turned on, and both of the parents almost screamed. Jara told them that there was no need to fear. She was their ally, but she came here because there was something special about their son, and she wanted to tell them that she believed their son was destined for greatness. The Sicilians looked at the hologram and then looked back at Jara with confusion and panic. Jara knew better than to try and reason with them, so she showed them, turning off the hologram first. She then looked at their son and asked for his name, as they both stuttered out the name Titus. Jara smiled. She called Titus his name, and the little boy looked over. She asked Titus to catch the little device. Jara pulled out her communication device and lifted it up with the Force and pushed it over towards Titus. The little boy smiled and pulled it in towards him before dropping it. Jara told Titus that he did a good job. She turned to the parents and she asked if she could take a sample of his midichlorian count. The two parents didn't know what to do. Aurelia asked her what that meant. Jara smiled softly, telling them that it was a simple little prick, and it would tell her how attuned to the Force their son was. Aurelia nodded her head, as Janice asked what the Force was. Jar stood up and walked over towards Titus, telling the parents that the Force was everything. It was powerful and soft. It was evil and good, but it was the makeup of the entire galaxy. It kept the planets in alignment and gave life to the weakest of individuals. It was the life force of everything in the galaxy. She pricked Titus's arm and then waited for the readings to come back. Jar looked up and told the parents that the Jedi use the Force for good, but an ancient religion used the Force for bad. It was no longer a threat, though, considering they hadn't seen them in over a millennia. Jar told the parents that if Titus was adequate to the Jedi requirements, then she would request to take their son to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Though she did tell the two of them that they would likely never see their son again, as attachments were forbidden within the Jedi Temple. However, their son would become part of a larger effort to provide assistance, relief, peace, and happiness to the galaxy. The Jedi were meant to keep the harmony in the galaxy, and Titus would contribute to that. Jara told them that she would not force their hand, as it was not the Jedi way. She got a transmission back, and she was fairly impressed. A child this far out in the galaxy with a midichlorian count of 13,700. Jara told the two that Titus had a potential to become a very powerful Jedi, though the goal in the end was not to become powerful. The goal was to become wise, to use knowledge, have serenity, create harmony, and sow peace. There was so much that their son could be presented with, but they had to be willing to allow it. Janus looked at his wife, and the two of them started talking. Aurelia told Janus that he was the heir to the family, but it was as Janus told his son every night. Titus had the gods with him. His path was right in front of him. If he had a decision to make, then he would be guided by the gods. But Aurelia told Janus that the decision needed to be made by them. She continued suggesting that they feared what would happen to him if his powers were discovered here on Sicily. He could be safe with the Jedi. She continued suggesting that what they feared could happen here if his powers were ever discovered. He could be safe with the Jedi, or he just would be safe with the Jedi. Janus nodded his head, telling Aurelia that he wanted to say goodbye to his son first. The two parents told Jara that their son was meant to become a Jedi. He would follow her path and do what it was that he was guided to do. Jara smiled, allowing the parents to say goodbye. The grandparents would get their goodbyes as well, and then Jara would take Titus back to her shuttle. After one full planetary rotation, the Jedi now had one more child to take with them back to the Jedi Temple. Jara put Titus inside of an infant pod and closed it up. For children this young, space could be extremely trying, especially if your species hadn't yet been around in space before, so covering the pod would make life a little easier during the travel time. Plus, from time to time, the conditions would be too difficult for a child to survive, and subsequently they would die in transportation. The ship lifted off as Jara told her fellow Jedi colleagues about her experiences on Messina. The Jedi suggested that when they returned to the Jedi Temple, they archive the information and the coordinates for the planet inside the Jedi archives. Jara smiled and nodded her head, telling them that they would call this system the Messina system. Their vessel hyperspace jumped over to the planet Ratan on the Hydian Way, and then from the Hydian Way they would use hyperspace runs to the Corellia run, all the way back to the deep core, and then to the planet of Coruscant. When they entered the atmosphere, the Jedi Temple was visible. The grandeur sight was something to take in. For an infant of the Force, the first time seeing the temple would fall in line with the rest of those early memory images that every Jedi remembered. For Titus, he would remember Messina, because as adults of the Force, those memories resided forever. Jara would take Titus and the rest of the children of the Force to the interior of the temple, where they would go through all the necessary examinations, just to ensure that they were worthy of becoming Jedi. And that's part 1 of 10 of our story. Again, special
10?
thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Mayonnaise Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Flan Vassis, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. I hope you all enjoyed this part 1 of the story. This has all been written out, so the entire story's done. The entire story's done. So at this point, what happens next has already been written, and I hope you all enjoy this series. This is my best work thus far. I believe it is, so I hope you enjoy it. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
Anyways, sorry, swallowed coffee down the wrong hole. That's it for part 1. It'll be probably tomorrow part 2, maybe not, I don't know when. It was weirdly reasonable, considering that they're setting up a new person besides Anakin, but a new person to have the spotlight on. Anyways, if you enjoyed, subscribe, like, all that good jazz.